My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm one of the co-owners and managing directors with Impetus Digital. For those of you who don't know what Impetus Digital does, our company builds some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration tools. And we do this for life science companies, pharmaceutical, medical device, biotech companies, so that they can actually interact with physicians, payers, patients through things like virtual advisory boards, medical education, steering committees, clinical studies, etc. And since COVID-19, we've been doing a lot of things like POA brand rollouts, sales and MSL training, and a whole bunch of other things. But more importantly, at Impetus Digital, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. It really is the onus, if you will, behind this podcast and this YouTube channel that we run. We like to speak to some of these provocateurs, these people who are on the leading edge, who are really leading the charge, if you will, on how we're changing the business models, both at pharma, but in healthcare in general. And by starting some of these big, courageous conversations, we're hoping that we can all collectively work together to positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm really, really pleased to have somebody here with us who's in that genre. And this is Sandra Graham-Mason. She's actually an award-winning track record, and she has this in the pharmaceutical marketing and sales area. She has vast experience working in many areas in a variety of different disease states, and she's particularly interested in oncology. And we're going to kind of explore some of that today. She has held various positions in the pharmaceutical business. She's had senior sales and marketing roles. She's worked at Bristol Myers Squibb, Sanofi, Eisai, and Immunomedics. And she's currently the director of marketing at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. I want to caveat that I know that we're hearing a lot about Regeneron today because of COVID-19, but that is not necessarily going to be the topic of today's discussion. She's had marketing roles that involve working in physician, patient, and brand strategy, and has also worked in product marketing, digital, and key opinion leader engagement. She's been involved in numerous drug launches. She's created innovative strategies, developed marketing materials, and she's won top national salesperson awards. She's also collaborated with numerous oncologists from across the country to create education materials for doctors, cancer patients, and in expanding patient advocacy groups nationwide. Welcome, Sandra. So happy to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you.
That's awesome. So why don't we kind of get started? You have a very interesting career trajectory, and a lot of people who are listening or will be listening to this on the podcast are going to want to understand about how you got to where you got to today. What is the background behind your professional journey, and how did you land at the current position of Director of Marketing at Regeneron?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. First, I would like to start off by saying, Impetus Health, this is amazing what you're doing, and I think this is something that we need in our industry. It's always nice to hear what others are doing. We do get siloed, especially within our own organizations, and even more so with our teams about what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think with this conversation that we're about to have today, even more so lets us know we need to expand and talk to people in digital platforms. So thank you again for the invitation. Before I get into that, I would like to say, yes, I do work for Regeneron, and I am a director of marketing there on a brand for oncology. And the statements that I am going to make today are my own, and I may not necessarily represent Regeneron. And thank you for the disclaimer as well, so that we're not confusing what I'm talking about today versus what's in the media of late. But just sharing my experience, I've been in the industry for over 16 years, and it's been a wonderful opportunity for me. When I started my career out of college, I was working for the insurance providers like the Aetnas and Cignas, for example. And I got in right out of college and went through the insurance school and did those kinds of things, and had the opportunity to become familiar with pharmaceutical as an industry just based on self-funded groups and working very closely with groups, large companies who were able to offer self-insured programs, and they would carve out their benefits. And one of the benefits that got carved out often would be pharmaceutical benefits. And I would start to understand a little bit more about that and became intrigued by the industry. And then, back in the day, I actually went online and posted for a job with Johnson & Johnson and got it, and had several interviews, went out, learned from the bottom up. I started out as a sales representative working in New York City, and it was fantastic. Learned a lot, had an opportunity to continue to grow and hone my own skill set, as you mentioned earlier. And most importantly, when I moved in-house from my sales roles, I did go into sales training, where I would take the skills that I've learned and share that with other representatives who were looking to advance their careers. And then from there, I had a stint shortly as a fill-in district manager, where I got to lead. So I really enjoyed leading a team of people who looked to me to help them solve their problems in their own fields, in their own territories, and how they can continue to make an impact with those doctors, but most importantly for those patients. And then, I had to tap on the shoulder, why don't you consider marketing, which I did. Never thought I would ever do marketing, but I tell you, it's been one of the best careers decisions that I've made for myself. Really get a chance to impact so many people I'll never ever meet, but I know that the message will resonate, and not only resonates with the patient, but also with the doctor, because the doctor needs to be ready to prescribe. And if the doctor's not ready to prescribe, that patient will never get that drug. So what can I do to continue to foster that kind of experience and learning with our doctors as well as our patients, because ultimately that's who needs the care. That's what we do every day.
That's beautiful. I love it. And Sandra, I would be remiss, especially in the really tumultuous environment that we're in, asking about your own personal opinion around large corporations and having the opportunity. You're obviously in a very important role and a very high level role. Your opinion about corporations being inclusive, allowing for diversified opinions, diversity in everything from gender to identity to all sorts of other things. Do you have a personal story or any personal perspective, especially in today's environment, and giving advice to other people who may want to target a role that you have in your corporation?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think that is a very topical conversation that we're having probably around the world. And it's been top of mind for so many people. As an African American woman living and working in corporate America, you do find yourself sometimes you might be the only person in the room. And I've been at many corporations where that has been the issue, but it depends on the role. And I feel when I can put myself in a position where I'm in the role, if I can succeed at my job, that just opens the door for the next person. And that's why I really work hard at my job, because I don't want there to be a limiting factor or barrier for anyone else entering into the field. But what I found in working with large pharmaceutical companies, even when I was in the healthcare environment and working for smaller companies, this is something that's top of mind for everybody, where we do want diversity, and diversity not meaning just the different colors of our skin. We're talking about diversity of ideas and thoughts and experiences, because that's really what makes it the most important and thing that we can do for our customers and our patients. So the ideas, everyone comes from a different place. The lens that we look at things differ based on so many other aspects of our lives that we need to bring that into the room and have that discussion. I've been a part of many organizations within where we have diversity groups where we talk about how to continue to grow, how to get those sponsors that we all need, and how to continue to tell that appropriate story. So whenever there's an opportunity to volunteer, I do. I volunteer to go out. I volunteer locally just to share information about this industry, because as I said, personally, I was not even aware of it. And it was just by chance that I landed here. So whenever I can share what I do and how much I enjoy my work and how important it is to society, I share that loudly, because I think so many other people would enjoy it as well. So anything that I can do to share, I do.
I love it. And I think that is so inspiring and so important in this day and age with everything that's going on around us right now, Sandra. So I love that. So
Thank
let's
you.
actually talk a little bit about what you work in, and not that there's tons of therapeutic areas, drugs. There's so many things that are important right now about getting things to patients for proper patient outcomes, and the myriad of other health impact that we're looking at doing in the healthcare space. But you work in a very important space around oncology, so treating cancer patients. So tell us a little bit about why that area is so special, why you're in it, and what are some of the things that you find so absolutely fascinating, and some of the things that you're really ultimately trying to target in that space?
Yes, thank you for the question. I am working in oncology because probably like so many other people where we've been impacted by oncology and cancer and death in my own family. And as a child, I can remember having a cousin. She would come from the Philadelphia area and stay with us in the summer, and she was our babysitter. And as years go on, she moves on, she's older, she's doing her thing. And we're getting older and we don't need that kind of supervision. My parents were working, but my cousin, she contracted cancer. And there was just this shroud around it where no one really wanted to talk about it. No one understood what she had or why. And my cousin, unfortunately, didn't even know what kind of cancer she had. By the time she became aware of her cancer, she had already metastasized, meaning the cancer has spread. So we never knew if she had breast cancer or ovarian cancer or brain cancer because she had cancer throughout her body. And the way our family talked about it really was, she was just ravaged by cancer and that she never had a chance at survival. And ultimately, once you get to stage 4, your chances of survival are slightly diminished, and we understand that. However, you can certainly still have a patient journey that can be filled with joy and so much life each day you get up and breathe. So one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about working in oncology is, one, because of her, because she didn't understand. She was not empowered, nor did she have the education necessary to have those kind of empowering discussions with her doctor. So what drives me every day in my role, and this is something that I take so seriously, I really work hard to ensure that when I talk to doctors, especially when I create materials for patients, that it's in that same authentic tone and in a voice and in language that makes sense. It's clear, it's not confusing, it's very concise, and it's very simple. This is what you need to know. And I think this is a situation that impacts everybody across all walks of life. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter the education level. People are afraid when this comes down to talking about their health care. And sometimes people feel, I don't know what to ask. And because of that, they're paralyzed and ask nothing. And oftentimes, especially generational, you'll find that the patient totally leaves everything up to the doctor to make that decision, but you'll have a newer generation of doctors who really want the patient and their caregivers engaged. So meeting the patient where they are today is what I try to do, and bring them along that journey so that they do feel that when they're in that doctor's office having that conversation, they can engage and talk about their care. They may not understand the full level like a doctor. I'm not suggesting that at all, but being able to ask some questions, clarifying questions, and understand your what you have, your disease is, and the treatments that are necessary that might help you is what I try to do on a daily basis. And that motivates me because I think about Betty, my cousin, and unfortunately she didn't have that, but I do everything I can to help support the next person.
Yeah, and that is so absolutely pivotal, knowing that you have those own personal experiences and bringing those to the healthcare table, because I think that completely changes the impact and your personal, I guess, touch, if you will, on everything
Yes,
that you do in the conversation that happens. And
yes,
so when we explore this idea of the patient journey, right, we talk a lot about this, and there's probably no patient journey that would be considered more complex and convoluted than probably the cancer journey. So not only at the individual cancer patient's level, but when you look at the overall therapeutic space, and so breast cancer separate from lung cancer, separated from colorectal cancer, and each and every one has their own unique journey. And then with it, is the N=1 or the Uber customized one by that particular individual. So when we get into that level of complexity, how do pharmaceutical companies or medical device or healthcare companies try to navigate and put sense to these very complicated maps?
It's a complex situation, as you said, and when you talk to one person, it's always an N of one because it's so personalized. And I think that's where we're going toward in an industry such as this, where there needs to be more of that individualized way of communicating with that patient, and that it so that it resonates for that individual. When you're facing a crisis such as that, a health crisis as cancer, you don't want this cookie cutter approach, nor do you want to feel like one plan or one product fits all. You need to have that customizable approach in that care, and being able to talk to those doctors about that is what really is going to resonate. And having a multidisciplinary team of physicians at your beck and call that can really help give you the most current and most aggressive way of treating that particular condition. What we like to do is talk about, health literacy and how effective, we can help patients become self-managing their own care by increasing the demands of the healthcare systems and requiring that patients not only are health literate, but also talking about digital opportunities and ways to continue to communicate with the patient and doctor. And then also, in this day and age, touchless options that are available for our patients. One thing, telemedicine has always been around. However, it was not really utilized. And because of where we became with this national pandemic, global pandemic, we found ourselves really having to adapt it and starting to make those change. I think the industry itself is starting to pivot and make these types of changes. We're looking at more digital opportunities of engaging with patients. And I'm talking about consumer-driven content that's personalized as well as omni-channel. And what I mean by that, I'm talking about coordinating this integrated approach and being able to meet the patient where they want to be met. One of the pet peeves that I have is that everyone says that everyone's on social media. Let's just put it out there on social media, which doesn't make sense because everyone is not on social media. Everyone is not using a smartphone, and there are still households in this country that do not have computers. And, what do we do? How do you communicate? Sometimes you still need to use print and mail to reach your client. And whatever it is, that's what we need to do, and you need to do it effectively. So I think a full-blown approach, a 360, if you will, approach of how to communicate with the patient and those doctors so that we can get that important information in front of all of those individuals. Because if you can't change the behavior, then you can't ultimately expect there to be adherence to a product.
I think you bring up something that's so important here, Sandra, and that is the patient centricity piece of this. This has
Yes.
always been part of the healthcare conversation, that patient should be the center. And I think this has been a lot of what has been discussed. I personally think since COVID-19, that conversation or that focus has been amplified. The patient is really what is absolutely important here. So I guess just in your opinion, you've mentioned several different things, including telemedicine. But if you sort of put yourself back prior to March, prior to COVID, the whole COVID-19 pandemic, and sort of seeing some of the strategies and tactics that pharmaceutical companies in the oncology space were exploring, and now putting yourself forward post-COVID-19 and figuring out that out, how is this patient centricity component of it modified, changed, or amplified in your opinion? And I know you already mentioned telemedicine, but has anything changed because of this pandemic specifically?
Yes, absolutely. I would say for me, what I really look for are this health belief model. And what the health belief model allows you to do is just to understand how to communicate with the patient, making sure that the patient can be health literate by having those, relevant and actionable call to action that you're looking for from the patient. And the way to do that really is to talk about the treatment in totality and then breaking it down so that there's this finite, understandable action requests of the patient. And I feel when the pandemic occurred, people were afraid. We didn't know what to do in March. Everyone was panicked. No doctors didn't know what to do. We had patients who didn't know what to do. We had regular consumers. Nobody knew what to do. So I don't want to just call people out by their profession. No one knew what to do. But where we got to is a comfort level. And within that, patients were afraid to go to the doctor. So they might have had underlying conditions that they knew existed. However, they didn't know what to do. So you're finding yourselves, and when a patient does get in front of the doctor, they're probably further advanced than they would have been if the pandemic hadn't occurred. So now doctors are needing to be more aggressive in the treatment because the patients are further along in their conditions. But with the advancements of telemedicine and people being more comfortable in having these kinds of conversations, you're finding that you can still get that same care right away. And this reminds me of a hospital that I read about is the Mercy virtual care model, where they've been in business now the hospital has rolled out this virtual platform back in 2015. They've been doing it for a very long time, where they have these hospital, or they call it a hospital without walls. And what they do is allow patients to talk to their experts in the comfort of their homes. And they've been doing this since 2015. And I think they might have been the first hospital system to do this in the United States. And what we find that model really makes sense because it became where we are today. I need to talk to a multidisciplinary team of people, of doctors, and to manage my cancer. What do I do now? I'm afraid. But having this kind of plan in place really helps the patient feel like they're still getting the same level of care that they would have received if they were in the doctor's office. Other ways of communicating, when you drive past the mall, if you have a smartphone, you might get ads that pop up on your phone. Here's another way of being able to get information to patients using geo-targeting or geo-fencing, whatever you like to call it. And that's another way to be very specific in the messaging based on your IP address and getting information to that patient where it's relevant to them and makes sense to them. Now that you go to the doctor, you have to sit in your car. There's another way to have touchless communications right in your car. Information that would be seen in a doctor's office, for example, can now be seen in your car just by accessing a QR code. There are so many changes that are happening, and I like this acceleration of technology and innovation that we're seeing today, because I think we can go so far beyond the walls that the pharmaceutical industry has kept themselves in. We tended to be behind the eight ball a little bit from a consumer perspective. However, I think now that we are at the age where everybody has been impacted by the same thing. We all need to make the same changes and pivot in order to continue to be successful. And the timing is right. I'm now starting to hear from other vendors about artificial intelligence and implementing that. I had someone telling me I should be using TikTok. So things that we would never have considered before in pharmaceutical are now happening. Your Alexa could certainly be that device that provides information for a patient who might want to know something about their drug. Can I take this drug with something else? Are there contraindications? You might just ask Alexa and maybe she can tell you yes or no.
Brilliant. And the use of technology has been absolutely immensely accelerated. And so this, there is, I suppose, the silver lining behind all of this in the healthcare space is that it really has, we're leveraging this groundswell of momentum to push forward some of these innovations and these technological breakthroughs to be able to educate both patients, physicians, allied healthcare providers, patient associations, et cetera. But one of the things I think is really important here is using the analogy of what's happened at the FDA. And the FDA has had to accelerate and change and modify what they're doing around technology. They just recently launched their whole, digital technology center of excellence to start being able to evaluate things like software as a medical device and other sort of technologies are actually acting as digital therapeutics, and on the list goes. So at a regulatory level, agencies like FDA, like other agencies in Canada and Europe, et cetera, are having to modify their infrastructure. Is that something that you think the pharma model is going to follow suit? That there's been a certain regulatory compliance legal structure that has been developed in organizations, and that they're going to have to modify to be able to quickly accelerate thinking, maneuvering, responsiveness in the social media sphere, so that you're staying on top of that communication channel, that omni-channel that you actually were discussing earlier?
I absolutely believe that is probably going to filter into the pharmaceutical industry. I feel when we talk about medical, legal, regulatory conversations that you have about something that you want to put into promotion, whether it be for a doctor or a patient, that can be quite a lengthy process. And you want to do the due diligence because you don't want to put out misinformation. So you want to give people the time to really review and give you the appropriate feedback so you can incorporate those changes. But I do feel that with the pandemic occurring and our new normal, we will have to do more in a social media or digital realm. And how do we get those materials reviewed accurately and appropriately, but timely, so that the information is topical and it's not so delayed that it's after the fact and no one's interested anymore. So I'm not sure what that model will look like, but I wouldn't be very surprised if it doesn't happen as early as, who knows, 6 to 12 months from now, that there may be new policies in place to help us do that. If they're making those changes at the FDA, it's going to impact this industry, and there's no choice in it. So we do need to be nimble so that we can continue to keep up with the demands of not only of our doctors, but also of our patients, because I do feel without that, we would be left behind, and it would be pretty sad, a sad day for all of us.
So when we talk about, so just backtracking a little bit more on the management of cancer patients. So we realized that, during that peak period where basically nobody knew what they were doing, everybody included, is there was a little bit of a hiatus. There was like a moratorium or like a stoppage of anybody doing anything. Since then, things are starting to kind of come back. There are some face-to-face, there's changing in the billing codes and kind of trying to push things a little bit more to normalcy, although there's still a lot of people who are going to continue with telemedicine. So I guess the question ultimately comes is, in this new era of telemedicine, how is this going to change the dynamics around diagnosis and management, specifically being able to, for example, make a decision to switch to a new drug or change the drug or start a drug completely new that somebody's launching during COVID-19 and nobody's ever been able to go to a conference or anything to talk about it? So there's a question around diagnosis and sustainment. And then how is this going to be done at a no touch or a low touch environment?
I've been thinking about that myself, and I was speaking with a colleague about, launching without having sales representatives going into a doctor's office that you would normally expect, and being able to supplement their efforts with digital. And I do feel that, that is the way to continue to accelerate and getting information to doctors. They're not going to conferences live anymore, so they're now being converted to virtual congresses, which is fantastic because it still allows that same great information and research to get out to the public domain. And, being able to not only have that compassion and empathy, but relatability and personalization and engaging on these platforms is what's really going to make the difference in everyone. Cancer didn't wait for COVID. Unfortunately, it continued on. Patients continue to, at least from advisory boards that I've been a part of and doctors whom I've spoken to, they've continued to treat their patients normally. So where, someone needed to go in for infusion, that continued to happen. They modified maybe the number of people who would be in an infusion center at a time, but that kind of care continued on. They did not in any way jeopardize their patient's health, which is fantastic. But also what you're finding is with these changes, I think is causing, or not forcing, because I hate to use such really aggressive language, but I think it's forcing not only patients but caregivers to be more engaged and better understand, what's actually happening. Now you can have that caregiver be a part of the conversation, whereas they might not been able to take off from work to go to a doctor's appointment with their mother, for example. Now, you have the adult child who can listen in just by a Zoom call such as this, or calling in on the telephone to listen into that conversation. And if the patient can't remember there was something that they should have been talking to the doctor about, at least the caregiver can do so and start taking those notes and keeping that journal so that the doctor understands what's really happening. I think that's starting to happen more, and I believe that the HCP community embraces it and welcome it. And I know me personally, I've had to do that for my father for his own care. And I live in New Jersey. My parents live in South Carolina. And unfortunately, my father was ill, and I had to speak to their doctors while I'm here and still try to think about, what my father's needs are, and talking to the doctor about that. And the doctor definitely welcomed that kind of engagement. Whereas my father, they're from a different generation, wouldn't have asked the doctors questions. I would ask those questions. And my father said, I really am proud of you for doing that, because I didn't feel comfortable asking those questions myself. So I do think ultimately this has changed the way the doctor and patient are engaging. And it's been something that I've always thought about and had a lot of passion behind, because I do feel in order to help to make behavioral changes, you need some impetus to make it happen. We all have it, but there's going to be now more of a collaboration between the doctor, the pharmaceutical company, the insurance companies, the patient, the caregiver. There needs to be that kind of succinct communication plan on how we move with healthcare in this country. And especially here in the US, this is always a hot topic about how we continue to move and looking at the value that these drugs bring for these patients. And even when you spill over into how the treatment will be covered from an insurance perspective, they want to see the value. The doctor wants to see value. So I think value is going to become more and more a part of the conversation, and what people are really getting from these drugs. And really, is it giving that type of benefit, not only financial for the insurance providers, but also from a health perspective, and that this really is the best treatment out there. And I think from an outcomes perspective, you'll start to see that other companies or in other industries are looking at those outcomes, because I do think it's going to be very important. And when you're trying to be specific in how you leverage these types of options, there needs to be value behind it. And I think value has a different connotation or meaning for others, depending upon what their viewpoint is.
Yeah, so I think it actually brings up some great points as what is value, what is risk sharing, how does this all going to pan out, and who's going to pay for what. I think is going to be a continued dialogue for the weeks and months and years ahead. So very, very important, especially in this world of telemedicine, low touch, minimal touch. Is it the same worth? Is that high value? Is it not? What's involved? And so these are all the things that I think we're going to continue to navigate, I think, as a healthcare ecosystem. So part of that healthcare ecosystem, and I think that one that was dramatically impacted during and just sputtering out of it now, is the whole clinical trials world. As you know, I mean, typically oncology, rare diseases, and everything else, you can't release or discover new products, diagnostics, biomarkers, and everything else without going through a fundamental, we're seeing this obviously with the COVID-19 vaccine, is we can't do this without fundamentally well researched and conducted clinical studies. And so a big part of that has to do with patient recruitment, patient retention, adherence to the clinical studies. Now, since COVID-19 and not being able to get audits and visitations by clinical research organizations and a whole slew of other people, many trials were interrupted. But having said all of that, and now we're kind of sputtering forward, there's a lot of questions now around seamlessly making these clinical studies more resilient and involving patients in a way that we've never done, where, for example, we're allowing patients to enter their own outcomes, or their own these patient-reported outcomes, basically, and even potentially leveraging wearables like studies that are going on with the Apple 6 watch, with the whole oxygen, blood, the blood oxygen levels, et cetera, and amidst many other things. So tell us a little bit about what your personal thoughts are for today and in the days and years ahead with the inclusion of patients in a much more robust way, being much more involved in clinical studies, and then using these technologies to allow them to participate more actively.
I feel in clinical studies, I'm grateful that the FDA has protocols in place that we must adhere to. You follow your phase 1, 2, and 3s and beyond phase 4 sometimes, just to ensure that nothing's going to happen post launch of a drug. And that's important. I think we can, as an organization or industry, do more in terms of the clinical trials and getting different people in clinical trials. Tends to be a lack of African American people who participate in clinical trials due to fear from things that have happened in this country years ago, but not a lifetime ago, that they are aware of, and that makes them somewhat reluctant to want to participate. So I think having a campaign to talk about what is a clinical trial, the understanding that if you're doing a clinical trial, are you getting drug? What's a placebo? That kind of understanding needs to take place. And then I think some concerted efforts in saying, here's the protocols for these clinical trials. And when you look at these clinical trial sites and getting them involved, hopefully that recruitment will continue to expand the number of people who can participate and the different people who participate. It'll be nice to know, now that we're trying to get to this customized medicine model, is this drug going to impact one race of people differently from another? Is it different from men versus women? Age, all of these other considerations need to be looked at very closely in clinical trial development. And I do feel when you have the patient voice very early on, whether it comes from advocacy or patients who raise their hands, who want to be involved, who are very active within communities, if you can talk to them with focus groups or advisory boards and get a sense of, what actually they would like to see incorporated in those clinical trials makes sense. And then also too, starting to get more of a component of quality of life inserted into the clinical trial and not have it as a secondary arm where you can't really promote about it. But if it were something where you could really measure and talk about, not only does this drug show the efficacy and we can talk about the safety of the product, but also from a quality of life perspective and how it really will impact your patient taking this medication, I think really needs to be discussed early on, as well as clinical phase development and trial design before you even implement or run with the trial. Wearables, I love it. I worked for an organization where they were a part of a contest where they were looking for wearables for someone diagnosed with epilepsy, so that there could be, that kind of, since there was a tremor or changes in your hormones, that you can then have it notify someone in your family, your caregiver, that this person's about to have an attack or a seizure. So something like that, I think, is fantastic. I do feel with technology, we can certainly leverage wearables. There are so many opportunities to do that. Just like you mentioned with the Apple Watch, absolutely, why not? And with the changes that have taken place, I think we need to not just totally relax traditional methods, but also incorporate some new ones that make sense and things that people are comfortable with using, that they already have readily available or right in their homes. Why not leverage that for something as important as a clinical trial and having to be a wearable device? I mean, when you walk with your smartphone, you don't need a separate device. You have everything you need right in that phone. And I track my steps right from carrying my phone, and I can look and see how well I'm managing those types of things. So I think this is something that's as simple as an app on a phone, or there could be other things that we haven't yet explored. But I welcome the technology component of care, because I do feel it's very important. And I've heard, through numerous channels, how those kinds of AI or technology components really can help to make a difference in outcomes in the people's lives.
Yeah, fantastic. And so important and so timely. And we're just at the precipice of things just coming out in a torrent of opportunities in this digital space. But having said all of that, we would be remiss not to have the discussion that really at the end of the day, data is the new oil, right?
Yeah.
It's the new fuel behind all of these machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithms that are surrounding all of us. Now, one of the key pieces is that all of us, individuals, patients, physicians, pharmaceutical marketers, we're all humans. And one of the things that the human brain likes to do is it likes to be lazy, and it likes to rely on heuristics and behavior and automaticity, doing what we've always done. So part of this is the ability to infringe on the natural workflow of what we're used to doing day in and day out, and changing, they call it the fog behavior model, is changing the way we are doing our behaviors. And a big piece, and I'm just thinking specifically about the physician and also thinking about the patient, everybody is vying for your attention. At the end of the day, the limiting resource in all of this, it's not money, and it's not even your data, it's your attention. So what's going to happen in the future is there's going to be lots and lots and lots of noise, distractions, dopamine drip opportunities of trying to gather your attention. So amidst all this noise, one has to ask, how do you get into the operations? How do you get into the day-to-day flow so it naturally becomes part of the behavior? At the physician level, the question is about interoperability with, for example, things like their electronic health records. At the patient level is how do they seamlessly do it so you don't even have to see that you're giving your data. So they call those things like, ambient biometrics. So it just seamlessly comes to your fingertips on you touching your phone or reading your face with facial recognition software. What do you have to say around the struggle and challenge that pharma companies have around being noisemakers, but being the right noisemaker and getting in the right place so that you can stand out above the crowd and being able to work in and become operable in their people's natural workflows?
That's really one of those innovative and provocative conversations right now, because I do feel data that's out there, how do you actually pull it and mine it and then execute it to some degree? And what I find is, from any kind of experience that I decide I'm going to embark upon, I work very closely with our, market researchers, and then work very with our advanced analytics team to determine, what am I doing here? Does it make sense? And being able to start culling through all of that data points. I mean, we have people who can mine it. That's not my wheelhouse, but I certainly work very closely with that team so they can come back to me and say, okay, here are my questions. I have these business questions, and they can go back and find the data to support yes or no. Do you do that or not? And if so, how might we do it, and who will it resonate with? And that's where I think data is so important for us right now. I know that there are so many opportunities where we are pretty much at the tip. We're not even at the tip of the iceberg in terms of where data is going to lead us, because there's so much out there. There's this organization that I work with from time to time called Color, and they just look at data where they mine all this data, and they can tell you like what's being said, what are these conversations, what's happening. Keeps you so top of mind, is so super focused about what's so important in what you do on a day-to-day basis. That kind of information is priceless, because being able to have control over that information really does help us move the needle forward in terms of how we communicate. Like you said, with our physicians, they're looking at data, hospitals look at data, everyone is looking at it, but no one really says, okay, now that I have all of this information, at my fingertips, what do I do it and how do I execute it? And that's where there needs to be more work done, have these concentric circles, starting to come together so that we can then say, when you look at data points specifically, I can leverage it by doing these 5 tactical things, and that still meets up to my strategy. And then from there, I'm able to execute and then continue to mine it over the course of quarterly or annually to determine if that really was a successful endeavor for me and my product. So yes, that is a huge component of it. It's expensive. it's an expensive endeavor, but I believe it's worth every dime, because once you start peeling back the onion, as they like to say, you then find that there are answers to questions that you had no idea even existed. And I think now more than ever, you do need to leverage your data points very, very much so, because we're in a time where we have no point of reference. So what else am I going to do other than look at what's readily available for me today? So I can't say I'm going to take this and apply this metric to it, because I don't know what the outcome is going to be, because it's never happened. So being able to get some smart people in the room and start having those conversations and really leveraging the information that we do have and move forward and get out of this, really confined thinking and go into more of an open space and open mindset really helps to move things differently in a way that we've never thought about before. So for me, at least for things that I'm going to be doing going into next year, it's all around data for me.
Yeah, so absolutely important, and it's pivotal. And it's a mind shift, and as you were mentioning earlier. So what's also interesting in this, besides the interoperability and being able to be a force, if you will, that's not considered noise, but actually being an additive value add, the question comes down to is how we're educating patients, how we're having those conversations with physicians in this era of low touch, no see. So do you see this being a world of omni-channel? Do you still see a role for medical science liaisons? Do you still see a role for sales reps? Or has the emphasis changed? Is it instead of like 75 emphasis on face-to-face and 25, is it now more rebalanced? What is your thoughts on the importance of the various marketing strategies and tactics that you employ?
I feel there's still a place for all of it. I believe, if you want to apply percentages, that's still to be determined. However, I had a conversation with 5 oncologists last week, and we talked about that, and we asked them, how do you like to engage? What's new for you? And some of them said, I like Zoom. Others says, I'm so overwhelmed, I can't do it anymore. Some said, I'm back to email because everyone wants to do these kind of virtual meetings that they've neglected email, and it's just easier for me. Just make it clear and concise and short, a line or two, and just get right to the point. Tell me what you want, and I'll reply ASAP. And some told me, their campuses at their hospitals have outdoor, benches, and they can just meet someone over lunch and have that kind of personal engagement, because they do miss it. Although maybe people might be surprised to hear a doctor say, I do miss my sales rep. They did say that they did miss them. So there's still definitely a place for them. And I think that's so important. We're humans, and we do need that human touch, whether it's going to be through venues such as what we're doing or live. That still needs to occur. And people learn and consume information differently. So we can't veer too far away from that. It's very easy to wake up and say, well, now we got to do everything digitally because we can't have these touch points. But I think that's the wrong approach. You can't take this blanket approach and apply it to everything that you do, because you're going to miss something. I think you keep everything that you have in place, and then you see where we go, because we're still at the point of potentially having, a phase 2 of this pandemic and new cases arising. So I don't think it's, you shouldn't look to throw things away so quickly. Take a steady approach, but make minor changes that you can easily measure. And then from there, continue to get that patient-centric information out there. Make sure the evidence is still valid, and then go on what's been proven to work. And don't do away with your sales force. I think, that's still important. You can't get too far away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when you actually mention that, I think what's important to note here is that you're really going away from the typical marketing and sales strategy, which is, here's the strategy, we apply this to everybody, and this is the way it works. In a very similar way to the way physicians have normally treated cancer patients who have lung cancer. Right. So now we're getting into this place of the N=1, really this uber specialization, or there's precision medicine. And you can apply the same concept to precision marketing and precision sales. So you're talking about having that really uber definition by physician about how they like best their information best delivered, communicated, etc. Do you see that eventually tapping into databases, both at a marketing and sales level, where that level of specialized communication will take place in a similar way that physicians are going to learn to leverage their databases for uber specialization of how they're going to treat their individual patients? And are we eventually going to become does our skill sets require us almost to become like data scientists, sort of evolving as a marketer where you actually become a scientist who has to understand data and then employ it? What does that look like for all of the various members of your team?
We do have to become, we're not all going to be the top of our game as data scientists, but we do need to better understand it for sure. And, you have the right people in part of your team who can certainly dissect that information for you and then, articulate it in a way that everybody understands it. But yes, we have to do that. We have no choice in the matter whatsoever, in my opinion. And then to me, the reason why that's so important is if we're not able to adapt quickly, we will not be successful. Just simple as that. And talking with, behavioral science and how to get people to make changes. We're all creatures of habit. And it's very easy to wake up and do the same thing over and over again, even if I know I shouldn't do it. I should wake up every day and exercise. I may not do that, but I want to. But how do I make that change? And I think if you can tap in and understand me behaviorally and understand what motivates me and then communicate with me in that form or fashion that will get me up and going, then I will do it. Whether it's the example that I use, getting up and going to the gym when the gyms are open again, knowing that there's somebody on the side waiting for me to be there, whether it's a gym partner or a trainer, I'm going to get there because I don't want to disappoint someone. I think we need to look at it the same way. If we're going to make these changes and expect that something's going to occur differently, we have to look at what we're doing today and say, this has to change. This is how we will employ these changes in order to just have the best outcomes possible. I don't feel, I feel it would be a mistake if we did not keep up with that. You have to understand the science behind data, and there's just so much and so many assumptions and hypotheses and all of these things that come into play. And if you're not having those kind of meaningful conversations with your own internal teams, you're missing the boat.
Yeah, for sure. And last but not least, I guess just as we reach the top of the hour here, there is a lot of data being shared. Clinical trials, management, we're talking about all kinds of other devices where information is going in through patient portals and navigating electronic health records, and sometimes it's on edge computing where it's just sitting locally, and sometimes it's actually being housed in clouds. At the end of the day, there's data lakes.
Yes.
And data lakes can have data leaks. And so one of the other questions, especially it's been brought to light, with the COVID-19, the contact tracing is, how secure is my data and who has access to my data and what is data sharing and what do I own? Is this a conversation that pharma is having? What should we be asking? What should we be doing around the whole thing, around concerns of surveillance? Who's getting my data? Can payers have access to this and suddenly shut me out of, employment and all kinds of other things? What kind of concerns are there around security and ownership and data?
That is a huge concern, and I think most everybody has that concern because you've heard of data breaches from some of the major corporations that you wouldn't have expected. So yes, that's a big thing. But for pharma, you have HIPAA guidelines, and then you also have the security measures that have to be in place so that you're not, from a compliance perspective, giving up person's information, name, social security. All of this information is private and should not be shared. And the pharmaceutical industry definitely adheres to those models all the time. And you do have certain encryption that's available. It's the same with the insurance industry. Encryption is available to keep that information as safe as possible. I think you always have your teams of information technology folks who are doing the best they can to keep that information as secure as possible. But I think when you have encryption in part of that kind of personal health information, you do the best you can to keep it safe. But from our perspective, I work with, we have these patients and we call them ambassadors. I know their first names. I know where they live. I don't know anything else about them other than that they have this condition. And I'm able to work with them to share their story, their journey about how they got to be where they are today in secure platforms so that other people searching for that information feel that there's another person who has this condition that they have, and how to, help them manage their own care and not feel so isolated. And I share that information very privately, but also very careful about what we share because we don't want to give up too much identifiable information. So those things are very important to us. Pharma has a lot of layers in place to ensure, from a legal perspective down to how I engage as a marketer, and probably even to how our reps can engage or not engage, because that is the individual patient. So that identity is taken very seriously with us as an organization. And I know we're just going to continue to have even further rules in place to ensure that we are always protecting the identity and security and safety of all patients. And you're right, no one wants to have a condition that they have held against them so that they can't, continue to work or have employment. So that stuff is extremely private, and we make sure not to release that information.
This is just a fascinating topic, Sandra, and literally we could talk for hours about the future of healthcare and your excitement about technology and what this means for patients. It's a very exciting frontier, and I equally share your enthusiasm. So we're going to be closing up now, but anybody who's interested we'll be leaving a link to Sandra's LinkedIn profile if you'd like to get in touch with her to ask any further questions. We'll also be leaving links for Impetus and also be sharing a video recording of this if you want to share it with any of your colleagues. For the YouTube and the podcast algorithm, we'd really appreciate if you can like or leave a comment or even subscribe to our channel. It helps other people to find us as well. But at the end of the day, if you're interested in these interesting, provocative discussions like the one we've had today with Sandra, if you're wanting to tap in with other people, other thinkers, other stakeholders to discuss what's happening with your brand, what's happening with healthcare, how's digital going to have an impact, how is digital therapeutics, how can you do all kinds of different things beyond the pill? This is exactly what Impetus does in our Insight platform, using a variety of curated tools that we built both asynchronously and synchronously in the Insight platform. So you can have some of these big, hairy, audacious conversations longitudinally over time so that you can work and build authentic partnerships with your stakeholders and collectively work to positively disrupt healthcare. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you all for attending today. We appreciate your attention. Thank you, Sandra, so much for a very robust, comprehensive, and very intriguing conversation, and wishing everybody a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it thoroughly.